Welcome to the second video, where I'll be speaking about current mafia news. This past week, former West Side Consigliere Louis Bobby Manna passed away at the age of 94 at the Federal Medical Center in Rochester, Minnesota, a facility that former Lucchese acting boss Matty Madonna was also transferred to not long ago. Matty's currently 89 years old. Manna received an 80-year sentence back in 1989 for racketeering charges that included the murder of Irwin Schiff, who was killed in August 1987 in my family's Manhattan restaurant, Bravo Sergio, as well as the conspiracy to murder John and Jean Gotti. Manna was denied compassionate release in November 2021 and wasn't slated for release until November 2054. Speaking of the West Side, their Florida-based captain, Nicholas Calisi, is presently in a halfway house in Miami, Florida, and will be there up until his release date on December 28, 2024. Calisi received 2 years in August 2023 after pleading guilty to racketeering charges. Once released, he has 3 years of supervised release, and this is hardly spoken about, but post-release supervision imposed by judges are despised by mobsters because besides having to do their sentence, like in Calisi's case, he now has to abide by federal probation stipulations and can't socialize with people known to be involved in criminal activity. Violating this condition can lead to revocation of supervised release and returning to prison. Like, for example, when Mikey Nose was arrested in 2022 for violating the terms of his supervised release by associating with members of his family, as well as the members of other families. He was ultimately sentenced to an additional 11 months for that violation and was released this past July. I had to do 5 years federal supervised release, which thankfully is now over, and also did 5 years on state parole back in 2007 up until 2012. It's a nagging inconvenience and a relief once completed. Let's head over to Milan, Italy for a few minutes. A trial is underway for a murder that took place 49 years ago. On July 1st, 1975, 18-year-old Christina Mazzotti was abducted and held for ransom, and after spending a month in captivity, she wound up dying. She was being held at this location when tranquilizers were administered to calm her down, and she must have had an adverse reaction to the tranquilizers. Back then, the 'ndrangheta would abduct people and reinvest the ransoms into the drug trade. There are several individuals on trial, including Giuseppe Morabito, an 'ndrangheta boss, as well as another interesting person, Giuseppe Calabro, nicknamed the Doctor. For years, Italian investigators had been unsuccessful in capturing Calabro's voice on any wiretaps, and would say the following regarding him. Calabro is a character of exceptional shrewdness, extremely careful, and measured in the use of cell phones, which he rarely used. While under surveillance, Calabro was observed stopping his conversations whenever people or cars were passing. He's not identified as an 'ndrangheta boss, but rather someone with entrusted power, a custodian of mafia values, with the wisdom of a sage, a problem solver. The one time he was recorded years ago, he described himself as an umbrella, a protector. He's told journalists that he actually appreciates their work. Years ago, when he was a prisoner, he was a reporter and a director for the prison newspaper. He served 18 years and another 4 years, both for drug trafficking, and has other convictions for weapons and issuing bad checks. He's also believed to be involved in the killing of 2 Italian policemen. His name has appeared in over 100 investigations into the 'ndrangheta going back to the 1970s. So we'll see what the outcome of that case will be. Since we're on the topic of Italy, a viewer wanted to know what I make of the recent arrest of Antonio Piccirillo in Naples, and if I think it's possible that some of the critics and reform members of the American mafia could also be playing both sides. Let me explain by giving some background. Antonio is the son of Camorra boss Rosario Piccirillo. His father's in prison, and around 2019, Antonio began campaigning against the mafia by making public speeches with the megaphone while denouncing the Camorra, saying things like, "My name is Antonio Piccirillo. I am the son of Rosario Piccirillo, who in his life made many mistakes as a Camorrista." Recently, He and his father were arrested and accused of shaking down a boating company in Naples. Antonio allegedly introduced himself as his father's messenger and demanded thousands of dollars from the owners. His father's already serving time for extortion and loan sharking. So indeed, this is all very strange. If in fact the protesting was a ploy to keep law enforcement at bay, it didn't work out so good for Antonio or his father. It's definitely a first. Getting back to the question, as for so-called reform mobsters, the word reform means relinquishing a criminal lifestyle. So if a person's portraying themselves as a reformed or changed person and continues the same destructive behavior and displays a criminal mentality, then they're full of shit. Or as we'd like to say, a flim-flam artist. One major issue I've seen is there are certain guys who feel the need to either talk or act in a way to display their toughness. A true tough guy doesn't have to say a word and acts only when necessary. But make no mistake, the American mafia is by no means accepting or embracing anyone like this. I believe Antonio is an isolated incident, possibly approved by his father. Okay, back to America, specifically New York. Did you know that Frankie Papani was going to get an administration position? What kind of power did he hold when you were around? At the time, when the Lucchese transition was taking place, Frankie Bones, I believe, was just off paper and was released in late 2015. His name, along with Georgie Nex, was mentioned at the time, and Frankie Bones was sitting pretty financially, which I did a video about, and I'll add the link down in the description. The next topic is sensitive in nature. In the early 1980s, Stevie Cria's wife was the victim of a crime, sexual in nature. I posted a blog about it, and I'll also add that link down in the description. Initially, a young black guy named Devin Smith was blamed. He ultimately went to prison, but eventually had his charges dismissed and received a $500,000 settlement in October 1991. But on August 13, 1982, Cria and his associates were arrested in the Bronx with a van that contained handcuffs and 2 loaded pistols in close proximity to Smith's house. Prior to this, Cria used his connection in the Pelham Police Department and arranged for his wife to unofficially view Smith through a one-way mirror. But her only recollection was that her attacker was black and wearing purple sneakers, so they had to let Smith go. It turns out that Smith was innocent of the crimes. There were others besides Cria's wife that fit the profile and were committed by Danny William McQueen. If you haven't hit the like button already, please do, as it helps with the algorithm. And for anyone who wants to show their appreciation for videos like this or help keep this podcast going, you can do so by the Super Thanks icon down below or the PayPal Cash App links in the video's description. So had it not been for Cria's arrests outside of Smith's house, they would have killed an innocent young man. What does all of this have to do with the present? Shockingly, Danny McQueen is on YouTube being interviewed. What I found more crazy is since his release in 2017, McQueen went back to living in Mount Vernon in Westchester County, where Cria and all his family live. Many people have questioned if the mob's weak in present day as opposed to years ago. And this story is the best example. Here's a guy who violated the wife of a former underboss and is walking around Westchester, an area, by the way, where numerous members of all the families live as well. And McQueen's been walking around for the past 7 years without a worry in the world. He's the CEO and founder of a nonprofit organization named ATONE, which stands for Actions to Overcome Negative Engagements, and personally does speaking engagements not only in New York, but Baltimore, D.C., Dallas, and also L.A. McQueen spent 33 years in state prison. Okay, that wraps up the latest news. Again, if you know of or come across anything recent, let me know and I'll add it to the next video. I hope everyone enjoys their day.